your son has a severe case of autism. This is a lifelong condition. This is a hopeless condition. He's never going to be able to communicate in any meaningful way, or talk, or make friends, or go to a typical school.
I never want to look at my child and think or see terrible. I'm going to think hope. He emerged completely from this so-called hopeless and irreversible condition, actually becoming a highly verbal, an incredibly interactive, a wonderfully curious, awesomely bright youngster.
I'm pleased to welcome Ron K. Kaufman.
Hello. Good evening. It's really nice to see you guys. I'm excited to talk about what we're going to talk about this evening because, I get the chance to speak at a lot of different conferences, and there's a lot of incredibly educated and knowledgeable people who do presentations. But what often happens is there's a lot of theory discussed, and then I still have parents coming up to me and saying, okay, that was really interesting to hear. Now, how do I get my child to speak? Or, that was really interesting to hear, but now, what do I do when my child's screaming and biting? So, tonight is really focused on giving all of you some really practical strategies that you can, hopefully if you want to, put into action immediately upon leaving the lecture. In order to do that, though, it entails really giving you a history of the Sunrise program and of all the principles that we're going to talk about so you can understand how they work and why they work. And it really starts with my own story and my own history, and that started when I was diagnosed as severely autistic as a young boy. And when I say severely autistic, I had no language. I was completely mute. I didn't look at anyone, including my parents. I had no eye contact. I didn't allow myself to be touched. I would spend my days doing repetitive behaviors like spinning plates over and over again, or flapping my hands in front of my face, or rocking back and forth. I actually had a tested IQ of less than 30. My parents were told, this is a really severe case. And, I talked to a lot of people who say getting the diagnosis of an autism spectrum disorder is really devastating. I actually don't think it's the diagnosis itself that feels devastating for most people. In fact, for many parents I talk to, they actually say in some cases it's actually a relief because you know what's going on. What I think can absolutely feel devastating for a lot of people is the prognosis. All the predictions of all the things that your child is never going to be able to do in the future. And clearly my parents received such prognoses as well. So my parents were told, look, your son has a severe case of autism. This is a lifelong condition. This is a hopeless condition. He's never going to be able to communicate in any meaningful way, or talk, or make friends, or go to a typical school, or own his own home, or live on his own, or have a job, or have a girlfriend, or all the things that for many of us we take for granted when we have a typical child. This was deemed simply not in the cards for me. And my parents were told, listen, you have 2 daughters, focus your time and attention on them, because your son is going to eventually need to be put in an institution where he can be properly managed and properly taken care of. And if you do put him in an institution, we might be able to, over the years, teach him some self-care skills, like we may be able to teach him to eat with silverware, or maybe to dress himself in the morning one day. But that's pretty much the ceiling of what you can hope for your son. And of course, I always really make sure that when I'm doing a lecture tour around the UK or the US or any other country, I always make sure I take a special entourage of people to dress me in the morning. So I think that's important to, of course, some of you are laughing, some of you are like, so just so you all, that's called a joke, right? I've been dressing myself for a few decades now, so we can put that one to rest. But I do joke about it, because the reason why is because it was said with such a sense of finality and such a sense of truth that this is simply the way it's going to be, and there's really no other possibilities in the cards for you or for your son. And, in the face of that, my parents did something really, really amazing. And by the way, this is, look at him. That's me as a little kid. You can see I'm really into these cups, much more into inanimate objects like that than I was into people. And first of all, please allow me to put a question to rest that's probably burning in many of your minds, which is, how did this adorably cute boy with all that hair turn into this not as cute guy with no hair? You know what? It's a question I've pondered myself many times. I can assure you it is not a side effect of the Sunrise program. But anyway, the thing that I do want to point out about this picture is that I actually do look very happy and involved in what I'm doing. And I think this points to and really crystallizes something that is so amazing and beautiful and incredible about our children, that makes them really different from a lot of other children, even other children who have disorders or disabilities. And that is this: our children are not banging on the door begging to be let out. They're not going around saying, please cure me of this horrific disorder. You know, I want to be part of your world. I don't want to be the way I am. They're not saying that, right? They're not saying, Mom, Dad, the whole pooing in a diaper thing, it's disgusting, it's gross. If you could teach me to be toilet trained, that would be great. They're not saying that. Our children are actually, they're in a world that works for them. It's us who want our children to grow and change. And why shouldn't we want that? That's a great thing to want. But the point is once we realize that the main thrust of that, in most cases, is coming from us, that actually gives us some good information, because we can start to really see that, okay, if we're the ones who want our children to grow and change and join us in our world, it's up to us to really get them behind it the way that we're behind it. It's up to us to really get them involved the way we want them to be involved. It's up to us to sell our world to our children so that they want it as much as we want it for them. And that's an important keystone to keep your mind on. So what did my parents do? My parents, they took me home. They turned their back on really all of these dire prognoses and predictions. And they designed and developed their own home-based child-centered program, where they worked with me for a little over 3 years. And of course, this is a great picture of the Sunrise program in action, the first Sunrise program. This is my mom working with me. And by the way, that you are correctly seeing that is a bathroom. We don't advocate that you do your Sunrise programs in bathrooms, but that was actually where she spent several years with me when I was little. And that was the beginning of what is now a really well put together, honed version of what we've developed into the Sunrise program playroom, workroom environment, which is an environment for really optimized learning and interaction, which I will touch on briefly in this lecture. And it's something we go into a lot of detail in our training programs as well. So this was the beginnings of that. And one of the things that was great about this was it was a really distraction-free environment where there wasn't a lot of extra stimulation happening. And at the same time, it was an environment where my mother didn't have to say no to a lot of things, the way you would, for instance, in a kitchen. And she didn't have to say, don't touch that, that's dangerous. This was an area where she could just focus on building that interaction level and that relationship with me. So after a little over 3 years of this, I recovered completely from my autism without any trace of my former condition. I went on to just live a regular life as a regular guy. I went to typical school. I had typical friends who didn't know about my history unless I told them. I went on to graduate from Brown University with a degree in biomedical ethics. And all of these things, which again were deemed not in the cards for me, were now things that became part of my life, and only because my parents decided to do what they did, and they did something really different than the conventional wisdom and what they were really told to do. And I'm going to try and really give to you all of the tools that my parents used that made my whole life possible, and that since then, over the decades, we've now used with thousands of other children to help them progress far beyond their prognoses as well. And ultimately, after graduating, I directed an educational center for typical school-age children for a while. And now I lecture and teach in the Sunrise program and do lectures internationally, so that ultimately this is a program and tools that people can have access to, which is why we've tried to give you guys access to this tonight. One of the things that I think is really missing in today's world, especially in trying to help people with autism, is and this is true in the US too, but it's more true even in the UK, is that there's just not enough options presented to people. So I talk to a lot of parents who say, this really makes sense, this sounds logical, this has really helped my child, but I wish I had known about it earlier. And that's the kind of thing where it's not like everybody should be told, you must do the Sunrise program, but everybody should be given, hey, these are 5 or 6 options that you can do, and explain that instead of shuttled into one tunnel, oftentimes a very hopeless tunnel where you're told there's just not a lot that's available for your child. So this is what happened actually. Ultimately, after my recovery, my father, Barry Neal Kaufman, who is an author, he wrote the book Sunrise, S-O-N-R-I-S-E. This is actually the current, more expanded version called Sunrise, The Miracle Continues. The reason why that is it actually has 5 other stories laid in the book of 5 other families who've used this program with their own children and had really remarkable results as well. So that's that book, and that was originally a bestseller and then turned into an NBC television movie, which was viewed by many millions of people from around the world, and then people started to come to my parents and say, can you help us? Can we learn some of these tools to help our own children? And so in 1983, my parents founded what is now known as the Autism Treatment Center of America, which is a part of a nonprofit charitable organization in Sheffield, Massachusetts, as you can see. And at this organization, we really focus on helping parents and caregivers and professionals and family members to really enable their children to dramatically improve in all areas of learning, communication, skill development, and overall development as well. And we help parents and professionals to really implement and maintain their own Sunrise programs, either at home or sometimes in a school environment as well. Probably what is most relevant to most of you who are sitting here is something called the Sunrise Program Startup. The Sunrise Program Startup is a week-long training program that's really designed to give you everything that you need to start up and begin this program. Now let's jump directly into the principles. In order to understand how the principles all fit together, it's important to get this key piece of the Sunrise program, because it's based upon this idea that the children show us the way in, and then we show them the way out. Okay, that's important because a lot of us, we love the second half of the sentence. Right? I'm going to show them the way out, right? I'm going to get them to act normal and stuff and talk and stop doing those behaviors and all. Yeah. And you know what? We want that for you too. We want to help your child grow and change and connect more with you. But what we've really seen is that if we want to show our children the way out and help them cross that bridge over to our world, first, we actually have to join them in their world. First, we have to build a bridge from our world to their world and connect with them on their terms. So that rather than forcing these children to conform to a world that they don't yet understand, we start by building a connection in their world that they can understand, and then using that relationship that we've built up as basically a doorway to help our children then start to walk into our world and connect with us on our terms and learn the things that are going to be useful for them to learn in our world as well. It's a really important key piece to understand, and that actually leads into the very first breakthrough strategy that we're going to talk about this evening. And that is, I have to tell you, this is probably the most controversial principle of the Sunrise program, definitely one of them. And it's called joining. And here's how joining works. All of those, quote, stimming behaviors that your children do, that everybody's trying to get them to stop doing, right? All those repetitive, ongoing behaviors that everyone's trying to get them to just stop. Not only do we not stop your children from doing those behaviors, but we actually participate in and join in with those very behaviors. Actually participating in them. And it's not some con game, by the way. It's not some situation where we're copying or mimicking or imitating or mirroring. I hear those words used a lot. That's actually not what we do. It's not something where a child's flapping and I'm like, okay, how long do I have to do this before he looks at me? All right. It's not about that. It's not about tricking them into interacting with us. It's actually about sincerely participating in and getting involved in the things that our children are really focused in and involved in. And believe me, our children are smart, they're sharp, they know the difference. And that's the real, and you know what, honestly, you all know the difference, right? You know the difference if your friend or your spouse or your partner is just kind of going along with something because they feel obligated to do it with you, versus when they're actually interested in your life and in what you're doing. That feels totally different for you. Feels different for our children too. So a key piece here is actually participating in and joining in with all those types of behaviors, those that we often call stimming, that everyone else is trying to stop our children from doing. Now, you might say, even as you hear me say this, and I can understand you having this concern, well, wait a minute, hold on a second. That sounds like the worst possible thing you could do. First of all, aren't you going to reinforce the very behaviors you're trying to change? I would think that this would be the very last thing that you would want to do. And you know what? People said the very same thing to my parents when they were working with me, right? They actually said to them, if he's spinning plates, you got to stop him from doing that. You got to take the plate away. You got to redirect him into something else. And I have to say, in retrospect, I'm certainly grateful my parents didn't listen to all those people. But I can actually understand you having that concern. It's a legitimate concern, especially if you haven't seen this principle in action yet or used this principle yet. Because what my parents, again, what they did is, instead of taking the plate away from me, instead of getting me to stop, they'd get a plate, they'd get down next to me, and they would spin plates with me. And actually, far from reinforcing the behavior or getting me to do it more, that was where they saw their first breakthroughs. That was the first time I looked at them, started including them in my play, and communicating with them. And this is what we see. When we join children in what they're doing, it does not reinforce the behavior. And by the way, I'm not just speaking from personal experience here. It's not like my parents just did this with me and it worked and so we said, great. We've done this with thousands of children for decades from around the world. We never see it reinforce the behavior. Quite the opposite, actually. We see these children, often for the first time, really look at us, connect with us, include us in what they're doing, and ultimately do the very behaviors we're joining in with less rather than more, and spend more and more of their time interacting. And again, a key thing to understand is that even the objection to say this is going to reinforce the behavior is based on a view of autism that isn't actually accurate. Right? What is autism at its core? Right? Oftentimes it's talked about as if it's a behavioral disorder or a learning disorder. Right? So basically it's a behavioral disorder where we have to get these children to change their behavior and stamp out these certain behaviors and promote these other ones. Or it's a learning disorder where these children just have a problem learning. And yes, our children behave very differently and they learn very differently. No question about it. But those are symptoms rather than causes. We really see that at its core, autism is a social relational disorder. It's an interactivity disorder. Basically, our children have difficulty connecting with and forming relationships with other people. Right? And that is the central deficit that our children are struggling with. And that then becomes the central focus that we try and help them with. So first of all, understand that if our children were taking all their social cues from us, they wouldn't be autistic and not a one of you would be here today. Right? So we already know that's not what our children are doing. Secondly, we really see that these children are doing these things for a reason. They're not crazy people doing these behaviors for no reason. They're doing it for a reason. They have now, it's not all the same reason, but ultimately, really see where our children are coming from, which is they're trying to make sense of a world that is incredibly unpredictable and incredibly overloading from a sensory input point of view. So things that might appear very predictable to us, to our children, might appear really unpredictable, but all the time. And things that might appear easy to digest, like if we just are silent for a second. Okay, so you can hear the vent. Some of you heard the rumbling a little bit in the floor. You can hear people moving around, even breathing sometimes. But most of you, for most of this lecture, are tuning that out and focusing on the person talking. Right? For our children, in many cases, that's all coming in at the same volume. And all the sights and smells and sounds and physical sensations are coming in a really intense way. A lot of our children have a lot of sensory integration problems. That, combined with intense unpredictability 24 hours a day, it's like them being in a shopping center all the time. So ultimately, they're trying to come up with a way to digest and cope with that. And they actually do. Our children are quite brilliant and they do come up with a way to do that. But then we spend a lot of our time trying to break them of the very method they've come up with to try and digest a world that for right now is indigestible to them. And this brings up a really important piece of the program to be aware of. First of all, Really important to understand that, and this is a common misconception, I hear it all the time, especially about the Sunrise program, which is, oh, I know what the Sunrise program, aren't you the guys that say, like, you just go with the child, you just like do what they do all the time, and then somehow they just sort of like learn to talk and be toilet trained and make friends and all that? And that sounds as ludicrous to me as it does to you, trust me. That's crazy, okay? Of course not. By joining your child, that's not going to magically teach them to speak and make friends and go to school and do all that. It doesn't teach them all that. However, it builds the platform that is necessary for all future education and growth. It builds that key interaction that you actually need to do that. So, as a result, we do not join with everything our children do. We don't. And I'm not going to advocate that you do that, which is why I have this slide, and I really want to help you implement this at home. So you want to understand, you don't want to join with everything. You only want to join with certain types of activities and behaviors. So what types of activities and behaviors? Well, we call it the ism. Okay? If your child is not doing an ism, we don't join. If your child's doing an ism, then we totally, absolutely join. And it's important to get the difference with that, because one of the things that's important to understand with the Sunrise program is that the when is as important as the what. When you teach is as important as what you're teaching or even how you're teaching. So when your child is doing these repetitive behaviors over and over again, that's actually not the time to teach. It's not the time to teach anything new. It's not the time to request things. It's not the time to say, look at me, or don't do that, or look at this new toy I brought in. It's not the time to do any of that. It's actually not even really the time to set any kind of agenda whatsoever. That's the time to relationship build. Relationship build, relationship build, relationship build. That's the time to do that. And let me paint you a little bit of a picture, actually. I want you to imagine it's just a really nice day in London. And you know what? You've worked hard all week, you're a little bit exhausted, you're kind of pooped out, and you just want to do what's relaxing and easy for you on your one day off. Let's say it's a Saturday and you have the day off, and you're just going to do something relaxing. So you go to a nice park in London, and you find a nice park bench that's kind of in a secluded area, and you sit down, and let's even say you bring your 2 kids with you, but you have your 2 kids play over on the grass, and you're just sort of relaxing on the bench, and you're watching your 2 kids play, and it's nice. It's a sunny day out, and it's so good to just relax and blow off some steam from the whole week that you've had. And then some guy comes up to you, some loud, I don't know, bald American comes up to you, and is like, hey, what's up, man? How you doing? Listen, I got a great idea. There's a great movie playing just down the street in about 45 minutes. So I tell you what, forget your kids. We'll hop in the car. We'll go see a movie. It'll be great. It'll be awesome. Okay, let's go. And you're like, listen, no, thank you. First of all, I don't even really know you that well. Secondly, you know what? If I wanted to spend my free days going to a movie, that's what I'd be doing right now. But I'm not into movies. So thanks for the offer. I'm just going to hang out here and relax and watch my kids. And I look at you, I'm thinking, what's your problem? I just told you what I wanted from you. Why didn't you listen to me? I explained to you really clearly. I thought that I wanted you to come to the movies. I'm not really sure why you didn't. You know what? Maybe I just didn't get your attention enough. So I get down here. Hey, listen to me. Look at me. There's a movie. Look at me. There's a, no laughing. Look, there's a movie in about 15 minutes now. Let's go. So, look, not your kids. Look at me. There's a movie in 15 minutes. Let's go. Come on, let's go. Let's get in the car. And now you've had a bit of enough of this. So you sort of stand up and you say, listen, back off, okay? I don't want to go to the movies with you. Just leave me alone. I just want to watch my kids. And then I realized what the problem is. You know what? I'm so sorry. I didn't even realize this earlier. The problem is your kids. See, if I get them out of the way, then you'll pay attention to me. So I grab them by the hair and I start pulling them away, thinking, oh, cool, now you'll go to the movies with me. Unfortunately, not going to happen that way, right? In fact, next Saturday, if you're on the bench and you see me coming, you're going to stand up and grab your kids and run in the opposite direction. Now, the important thing to realize is this is not because I'm some mean person trying to be mean to you and inflict pain on you and make your life difficult. Actually, my intentions are really sincere and really nice. I just want you to have fun with me and go watch a movie doing something that is really important to me. I'm not trying to make your life miserable. I have really good intentions. But you know what? It doesn't matter that I have good intentions. It doesn't matter that I'm trying to be nice. It matters to me. It doesn't really matter to you, though, because according to your experience of this whole interaction, number one, I'm really in your face. Number two, though, and more importantly, I am conveying this message to you over and over again. Hey, no, stop doing what you want. Do what I want. No, I know you want to do that. It's not what's important. Stop doing what you want and do what I want. Right? Let's take a moment, right, and slip behind our children's eyes and experience what this might be like for them. Right? So our children, they're in this world where it's just boom, 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 one unpredictable thing after another. It's craziness, it's happening. Plus, at the same time, you have sensory overload. You have all these sights and sounds that you can't properly regulate, and they're coming in, but you finally find a way to actually cope with this and to deal with this and to digest this. You finally find a way to deal with this. And you do it, and you come up with an ism, and it's some repetitive activity, and it finally, you're able to tune out everything that's coming up towards you and overloading you. You're able to tune out all of that and really get to a place that feels better for you. And yes, finally you do it. And as soon as you finally figure that out, everyone around you who loves you and who cares about you descends upon you and says, stop doing that, stop doing that, stop doing what you want, do what I want, stop doing what you want, do what I want. Imagine what that experience must be like. And one of the things that I actually talk about oftentimes with parents and professionals who are doing the Sunrise program is if you're going to effectively do the Sunrise program, you have to learn to really be a great salesperson. But you're not selling anything that costs money. You're selling human interaction. You're selling looking in your eyes. You're selling making friends, taking turns at games. Right? You're selling all that, and you got a really finicky customer over here, which is your child. And they're pretty happy with the product they got already. So it better be a great sell. Now, would this be a great sell? Would this be a great sell? Hey, listen, I got this great thing. It's called being part of our world. It's totally awesome. And listen, here's the best part of it. When you join us in our world, you get to stop doing all the stuff you love and do all the stuff you hate. Isn't that cool? No? It's not what you want? Okay, nobody's buying that. Certainly not our children. Right? They're not buying that product. Right? So we've got to come at it from a totally different point of view. So, imagine this. Let me come back to the analogy for a moment. Imagine you're the same person, you're sitting on the park bench, you're relaxing, you're watching your two kids, and I walk over with my two kids, and I sit next to you on the bench, and I let my kids go play over there, and I'm watching my kids for a bit, and I just hang out next to you for a few hours, and you know what? I don't even say anything. A couple hours goes by, it's time for me to leave, I get up and leave. The next weekend, I see you there again. I'm sitting on the bench again with you. I'm watching my two kids, and maybe we chit-chat a little bit. Are those your kids? And you say, yeah. And I say, yeah, these are my kids. And maybe I ask you how old your kids are. I tell you a little bit about my kids. This happens a little bit more and more. Every weekend, we sit on the bench next to each other. We watch our kids. We chit-chat a little more. I ask you a lot of questions about your kids and what you like to do. This goes on for a while. After 3, 4, 5 weeks go by, and I'm sitting next to you one day. We're sitting on this bench, we're watching our kids, and I go, hey, you know what? I was actually just thinking, my kids are really into movies. I'm not even sure why, but they're really into going to the movies. How about next weekend, we get your kids. We get my kids, we hop in the van together, we go see a movie. Now, the thing that I want from you has not changed, right? It's not like I've given up my goals. I still wanted you to come to the movies with me. I still asked for the very same thing from you. But the way that I went about it was totally different. It was diametrically opposed to the other way. And you know what is amazing about this is I took the time to really involve and connect with you based on what you were interested in. We actually, in a sense, built a relationship and a connection based on a common interest. And here's the truth of it. You might still not like to go to movies. Right? Just because I did this, not going to make you all of a sudden love movies. You might still not really like to go to the movies. But you know what? You might come with me anyway. You know why? Because now you're invested in me. You're invested in me. You actually care about me. So you might actually come do something that is not your favorite thing to do, but that I really want you to do with me. That's another reason why this builds that platform that you can then use to springboard off of and then start really challenging and stretching your children. If you go to your children and say, give me $50 and there's no money in the piggy bank, you're getting nothing. But if you come to your children and you've been putting quarters in there every hour for 3 weeks, and now you say, hey, can I borrow $50? It's sitting there. If you've put in the time, you've put in the connection. So now you're in a totally different position later on to really challenge your children to do something that may not be their favorite thing or that may be quite hard for them. So it really sets the whole stage for what you're looking for. Now, ironically, the only way to do that, though, is to really sincerely join without it being a con game that's designed to maneuver your child into a different behavior. When you're joining, you have to be 100% joining. Not joining so that in 10 minutes they'll look at you, but joining because it's like saying this. It's like instead of saying, stop doing what you want, do what I want, you're saying, I just want to be close to you because I love you. And you know what? If you like twirling pens, I am the pen man. I'm all about pens. You know why? Because I love you, and if you love pens, I love pens. And that then begins, ironically enough, you know what's so great about this? It actually, it builds relationships, and no, you're not teaching a specific skill, but it actually does begin to teach the very central point and deficit that our children are lacking, which is, remember, our children have difficulty creating relationships, and they're not naturally interested in what we're interested in, right? Partly, we want our children to start to be spontaneously interested in what other people are doing. So you don't teach that by saying stop doing what you're doing, do what I'm doing. That's the opposite of the skill we're trying to teach them. We teach them that by actually saying, oh, I'm really interested in what you're interested in, and that then begins to build the relationship where they then do learn to become more interested in what we're interested in. And again, that comes down to looking for the ism and joining in with the ism, not with everything, just with the ism. Now, what is an ism? An ism is actually, it's not that complicated. It's actually very similar to what many of you might think of as stimming behavior. The difference is that stimming refers to self-stimulating behavior. There's actually many reasons why our children do this behavior. Many, many reasons. Could be self-stimulating. Could be very often self-calming. It could be to balance out a physiological imbalance. It could be to deal with a sensory integration issue that's happening. There's lots of different reasons that our children are doing this. So rather than saying, oh, they're self-stimulating, we say, oh, we name the behavior. It's called an ism. And an ism has 2 characteristics. Okay? And this is what you want to look for, because this is how you're going to look for how you know whether you're going to join or not. Okay? 2 characteristics. 1, it's repetitive. 2, it's exclusive. Let me just define those really quickly. Repetitive is pretty obvious, right? Repetitive, it's happening over and over again. But I would just encourage you to have a wide view of that, right? This looks very obviously repetitive. There's lots of other ways to be repetitive that aren't as obvious, right? Your child may look like he or she's playing with this toy over here, and you know, doesn't look that different from the way a typical child might play with this toy. But if you step back and watch for 15 minutes, you'll notice that your child plays with this over here, and then goes over here, and then goes over here, and then comes back here, and then goes over here again, and oh, they're circuiting. They're actually circuiting around in a similar way, and they're not very flexible to change that. So that's repetitive also. Or you may have a child or a teenager or an adult that you're working with who has Asperger's syndrome, who's highly verbal and doesn't do any of this kind of stuff. But they love talking about airplanes, the engines, the wings, how they're built, right? So that's that child or adult's ism, right? So it's repetitive, and then secondly, probably even more importantly, it's exclusive. And exclusive, it's important to define it. It's a little hard to take sometimes for certain parents at first to really get what exclusive means, because by exclusive, we really mean your child is trying to tune you out. Now, I know that it sounds hard to swallow because you love your child, and not everyone likes the idea of They're trying to tune us out. So it's important to understand your child's not trying to tune you out because they don't love you or they don't know that you love them. It's not personal in that way. Remember, there's all this unpredictability and sensory stuff coming in. They're trying to tune everything out, right? And just create a world that's digestible to them. So it's exclusive. How do you know it's exclusive? Because exclusive is not including you. Your child's not looking at you. They're not including you in what they're doing. They're not engaging with you in any way. Okay, so if it's exclusive, it's repetitive, then it's an ism, then you just join. You don't have to be, a brain surgeon. You don't have to come up with any brilliant new idea. It's actually quite easy to do once you let yourself do it, rather than thinking, is this being productive enough? Am I doing what I'm supposed to do? Just join when that's happening. Just do. Get really involved in what your child's doing. In fact, try and get more involved than your child actually is. If I'm with a child who's doing this with a piece of paper, right, then what I do is I don't sit and go like, I say, oh, I bet you I can get more into this that paper thing than this child is. So I might go, and I just focus all my energy and get really involved in it. And in a way, part of what I'm also doing is I'm saying, what do they see in this? I want to see what my child sees in this. And this is powerful. What you're going to actually see is, as you join, the biggest change you're going to see is, the more you join, the more you're creating this relationship with your child, where your child is engaging with you more. That's the biggest thing. However, you're going to have other benefits too. A big one is, you're going to start to unlock the door to what your child is actually doing and why. So many of these behaviors might look nonsensical to us, and we might not understand why our children's doing them. Of course we can't understand it, first of all, because you can't understand anything that you're trying not to look at and trying to squelch down and reduce. Right? So this is, we're looking at it with open eyes, and we're trying to see what our children see. And that actually, you will find, not in every case, but in many cases, you will start to finally understand what they're actually doing and what the reasons are. And our children have great reasons. We had this father who took the startup program, and he had a son named Jerry. Okay, and this dad, he was in many ways like a really typical dad, in that he really loved his son, but also really struggled with his son's autism and his son's differentness. And he's a great guy, really wanted to help his son Jerry. And he said, I remember it was about halfway through the startup program, he said, listen, a lot of these principles sound great. I like the idea of the playroom. That sounds excellent. But my son never ever looks at me or connects with me at all. However, when there's Legos around, when he's playing with Legos, he is so obsessive in the Legos that it's even more pronounced, and it's like I'm not even there, and he's just focusing in this really intense way on these Legos in a really repetitive way. And so how about if I do these other principles that you're saying, but if I'll just take the Legos out and leave the box of Legos outside the playroom so that he doesn't obsess on that all day. And we asked him why he wanted to do that. And this is a big piece too of how we teach, which is instead of saying, you know what, that's not what we do, that's wrong, don't do that, we wanted to understand why this was important to him so that we could be most helpful to him. So we asked him, well, how come you want to keep the Legos outside of the room? And he said, well, this is what I was just telling you, because he just totally focuses on them, obsesses on them, completely ignores me. And we said, no, we totally understand that's what he does. But how come you don't want him to do that? And he said, well, it's hard to watch. It's hard to watch him do that. And we said, why? And he said, because he's just being so autistic and he looks really different, and it's hard to watch because I really love my son. I just hate his autism. So when I watch that, it's like the autism's winning, and it's just hard for me. And that led to an amazing discussion that we have actually since had with many other parents. Many other fathers, many other mothers have had this exact discussion over this issue of, can you love your son or your daughter and hate their autism? It's something that we talk about a lot now because this father brought it up, and it's sort of touched a nerve for a lot of different parents. The thing that this father came to, which was really helpful for him, is that autism was maybe not forever, but for right now, here today, it was part of who his son was, right? It was like the hair growing out of his head. It was like the color of his eyes. It was who he was, right? I mean, can I say, hey, listen, if there's one thing I hate, it's blonde people. Oh, you're a nice lady though. You're my friend. Don't worry. Don't take that personally, right? I can't do that, right? Part of who you are is a blonde person. I can't hate blonde and love you at the same time. And this father really came to this idea, and then he really decided he wanted to embrace all of who his son was. So the startup program ends on Friday afternoon. This father goes home on Saturday morning to his son, really excited to be different with Jerry. So he decides, you know what, I'm going to really join him. He goes into his son's room and he takes this box of Legos, and just as he predicted, his son completely ignores him and just takes out these Legos and just starts really getting into the Legos. Now normally, his father would either then take away the Legos or just leave the room because he didn't like to watch this. So he didn't even really get to see exactly what his son was doing. But now he's going to be different. He's going to really join in with this. So he gets some Legos of his own. And he's like, okay, I don't pretend to know what he's doing, but I'm going to get really into this and join in with him. So he starts looking at his son and watching what his son's doing. And he notices his son build like an L-shaped figure. So he says, I don't understand why, but I'm getting really into this. I'm going to just join. So he builds an L-shaped figure. And then Jerry builds another L-shaped figure. So Jerry's father builds another L-shaped figure. And then Jerry takes these two L-shaped figures up, made out of Legos, starts holding them up like this, in like a square, and walking around the room and going, holding it up to the light. Now again, his dad's like, okie dokie, I don't know why this is happening, but I'm going to get as into it as he is. So Jerry's father starts walking around the room, holding it up to the light, going, and he's looking at his son, and he's getting into the activity, and he's doing it over and over again, and he's getting really focused on it, and he finally realizes that actually it wasn't what he initially thought. Jerry was not walking around the room looking through this little box he had created at the lights. That actually, when he really looked at what Jerry was doing, Jerry was actually holding it like this and kind of looking sideways into this box, looking at this side of the little shape he had created. And when Jerry's father looked at the side of his own box, when he held it up to the light, you know how Legos are kind of shiny, he actually found he could see a reflection of his own face. And when he held it up to the light and went like this and like this, it made his face fatter and skinnier, like he was at a carnival. And he's like, yes! This is awesome! I see the light. I get it. He's totally into it. He glances over at his son. Jerry has dropped the Legos and is looking at his father like this. Now, of course, Jerry was nonverbal at the time, but we could guess a thought like, Dad, I've been doing this for 3 years now. Are you just catching on now? So anyway, he's dropped the Legos. He's looking at his dad, looking straight at his dad. And his dad notices this, can't believe it. Can't believe his son's actually focused on it. So it just freezes for a second. And he's getting so excited about it that he smiles. And to his complete surprise, Jerry smiles right back at him. And then really slowly, Jerry's father takes his hand up like this and just waves to his son. I mean, he's just sort of saying hi, doesn't think anything will come of it. And Jerry's looking at him, and he picks his hand up and he waves back at his dad. And they share this really sweet moment where they're looking at each other, they're smiling at each other, they're waving to each other, that really his father had never ever shared with Jerry before. And of course, then Jerry, a few minutes later, Jerry goes back into his Legos and Jerry's father joins him again. And it was this incredible moment that he realized he had this breakthrough with his son. It really sold Jerry's father on joining. And so over the ensuing weeks, actually, Jerry's father joined him more and more, whenever he could in what he was doing. As Jerry was joined in his focusing on his Legos and playing with the Legos, as he was joined over the ensuing weeks, actually, Jerry, number one, became more and more interactive with his father and with other people and spent more of his time interacting with other people and actually became less and less interested and reliant on the Legos. And ultimately, several weeks later, was actually doing about 45 minutes a day playing with these Legos, which was an activity that he used to be able to do all day if you left him with the Legos. He would just do it unlimited. So this was a huge piece and a huge sea change. And ultimately, what we can see is that the very activity that Jerry was doing to tune out his father actually connected with his son and also made it unnecessary for his son to then need to use this activity to tune his father out. And that let all other kind of breakthroughs in through the door and other kinds of breakthroughs with Jerry happen. Okay, so there's a lot of, and again, each when your children are doing these activities, they're all going to have different reasons, of course, right? That was Jerry's reason. There's lots of, a lot of times an ism can be curative or palliative. Palliative meaning to reduce pain, right? And we even had, there was a little girl named Carrie who used to flap her hands at the edge of her vision like this, especially when she was moving around the room. She would flap her hands. And of course, everyone who loved her, and her parents were really sweet, they adored her. One of the ways that they were trying to help her is whenever she would do that, they would gently push her hands down and say, quiet hands, right? Now, Carrie was examined by an eye doctor, an ophthalmologist. And this doctor found that her retina, there was a problem with her retina. We have, with both of her retinas, we have two kinds of receptor cells. We have cones and rods, right? Cones help us see straight ahead and color vision. Rods are black and white, peripheral, and depth perception. So what this eye doctor found was that Carrie had a problem with her rods, meaning she actually had inhibited depth perception. Couldn't really see depth and couldn't see her way around the room. However, and the doctor said this, we did not say this, the doctor said that when Carrie would flap her hands at the edge of her vision like this, it would actually stimulate and help build up her rods in her retina. So this little cutie, this little cute little girl, she's just trying to see her way around the room, right? And everyone around her who loves her and cares about her is constantly saying, quiet hands, put your hands down, quiet hands, right? There are reasons that our children do what they do. Let's look for the reasons instead of just trying to make them look like a typical child. Then we can really, really help them the way that we want to help them. In a sense, I could sum up this piece, this principle in this way. This is a big difference between the Sunrise program and a lot of more traditional modalities for working with children on the autism spectrum, which is more traditional modalities tend to focus on changing behavior. Okay, I see this child. How can I stamp out and get rid of these more autistic behaviors and promote these more typical behaviors? That's what you're asking yourself as you're focusing in that direction. I want to change this behavior. We focus on creating a relationship. So our question is different. Our focus is, how can we create a deeper relationship with this child first? And then we also have other things we want to teach this child. But first and foremost, how can we create more of a relationship with this child? The next principle is like, if joining is the right hand, this next principle is the left hand. And remember I was saying we don't join with everything. We only join with isms, because that's not the time to teach when our children are doing isms. That's the time to relationship build. So what happens is, when your child's being exclusive and ismy, you just join until you have your child's willing engagement. Right? Until you have your child's willing engagement. Then that's the time to start to build and challenge and teach more. Okay, so that's where this is one of, we have a number of ways, a lot of different ways that we teach and challenge children. This is one of the key ways. So, and again, this is once you have your child's willing engagement. And it's called facilitating skill acquisition by capitalizing on your child's own motivation. I know it sounds a little long and complicated. It's actually not. It basically means if you go with your child's interests, you can dramatically accelerate their learning curve. That's basically what it means. And there's a number of ways to make this happen. First of all, it's based on this idea, which I don't think is going to shock anyone here, right? This is very different than joining, right? A lot of people might fight you on joining. Nobody's going to fight you on this idea, right? They're going to, when we say motivation is one of the largest factors for growth, nobody's going to argue with that. It's very widely acknowledged that when you teach someone in a way that's more motivating, or when someone is motivated, they will remember more, they'll have a longer attention span, they'll learn at a greater speed. That's commonly agreed upon. We didn't invent that. Okay. Here's the irony though. Although it is widely acknowledged, it is very, very rarely used with any kind of consistency with children on the autism spectrum. Oftentimes we say, hey, listen, we'll worry about that stuff later. We just got to get this child like remotely caught up or toilet trained or whatever. We don't have time for motivation, right? But ironically, this is the very group of children and adults who can most benefit from this principle. And the reason for that is because with typical children, you can get away with teaching them in a way that is not motivating to them. Now, it's not the fastest way to teach them, But you can get some basic learning happening because you have a baseline level of interaction with a typical child. So even if they really hate what they're learning, they'll probably learn some of it. Right? Now, again, not my first choice, but you can get away with it with a typical child. With our children, we don't even have that basic level of interaction. So it's even more important that we teach in ways that are motivating for them. Okay? And the way that it tends to work is unfortunately the opposite of this. The way that we tend to teach tends to not match our children's motivation. And what we see over and over again is, let's say in typical situations where we try and say, okay, you're going to learn in this way. You're going to sit down here, we're going to turn to this page, or we're going to learn this subject first, or we're going to do it this way, right? You may be able to do that with some typical children. With our children, that is not going to match up with their motivation, and so it's going to very, very much slow things down. And what we see as we watch this happen is that traditional learning modalities will very rarely be motivating for our children. So what we do is we customize the presentation of the curriculum to match our child's highest area of interest. Okay? It doesn't mean you restrict what you teach at all. Right? You teach everything you want to teach, but you customize the presentation of those educational goals with what your child's own motivation is. Therefore, you end up using the skills and interests that your child already has rather than trying to teach against the grain. There are a number of ways to do this. First of all, the most simple way to explain it is if you have, say you have a little girl, right? Whether she is special needs or typical, doesn't matter. But let's say you're trying to teach her to count to 10, right? So you have her count 10 orange stickers that you put on a piece of paper, little orange circles. But wait a minute. Maybe this little girl really loves dinosaurs. So the question is this: will the little girl learn to count to 10 faster if you have her count 10 dinosaurs instead of 10 orange circles? What we say is, and what we see in practice is, yes, every single time. That girl will learn faster every time when she's counting 10 dinosaurs versus 10 circles. So it's based on that embryo of an idea. Now again, this can be applied. This is not limited to children who are nonverbal, or children who are young, or children who are learning a more simple skill. This is absolutely broad-based. It applies whether you have a nonverbal 3-year-old or a highly verbal 17-year-old who has Asperger's syndrome. Right? So an example, examples of both ends of that spectrum actually. We had a mother who had a little boy, and she really felt like she was at her wit's end by the time she got to the startup program. She was just really kind of burnt out, and one of her biggest things was, listen, I've been trying for 6 months to teach my son to be toilet trained, and not only is he still not toilet trained, but we are no closer than we were 6 months ago. And if anything, we're less close. And honestly, I don't know what to do from here. So we talked to her about this principle and about what to do and how to implement it. And we said, you need 2 things, okay? First is you need first is you need something that he's motivated by. Second is you need an educational goal. Now we have the educational goal. The goal is, let's say, urinating in the toilet, okay? So we asked her, okay, so what's something that your son is motivated by? And she said, I don't know. How am I supposed to know that? And we said, well, hold on one second. What does he do when no one else is trying to get him to do anything? Like, what does he do? What is he into? What does he spend time doing? And she said, lots of things. One of the things he's really into is steps and stairways. I don't really know why he likes to climb up and down them and build them, and he's into that. But honestly, I don't see how steps and taking a leak go together. And we said, well, guess what? They don't go together. We're going to make them go together. That's how this works. So we brainstormed with her a little bit, and then the startup ended on Friday afternoon. She gets home on Saturday morning, and she buys, real cheap, she just gets this little 3-step wooden stepping stool, little 3-stepper. And she brings it in, and he's really excited to have this, and he immediately engages with her, and they start playing with it. And then she starts building more complicated games where she moves it around the room. She does this with him every day for 3 days, actually 2 days, and then in the middle of the third day, she actually takes the stool, she pushes it up against the toilet, and has him climb up the 3 steps and wee in the toilet. 2.5 days, that's how long that took her. 2.5 days of focusing on that for something that she couldn't get in 6 months. Now I know, even when I say that, it can be hard to hear it because you're thinking, that actually, to be honest, sounds a little too fast. It sounds too good to be true. It sounds like, how could you make something that takes 6 months take 2.5 days? And that's why it's important to realize this is not magic. It is not mysterious. It's actually really clear how this works. This principle plays to your child's intelligence, as do most of the Sunrise Program principles, many of them that we're going to talk about, that I'm going to bring up, play to your child's intelligence. We know your children are already brilliant. They're already sharp. But they have other challenges and they have difficulty engaging with people, so that isn't immediately apparent to everyone. But it's very apparent to us, and this plays to your child's intelligence. Did this little boy lack the intelligence to walk up to a toilet and urinate in it? No. Did he have some genetic no-pee in toilet disease? No, right? Of course this was possible, but just because his mother really wanted it for him, and we wanted it, didn't mean that he was just all of a sudden going to want it for him. He was okay doing it the way he did it. He was getting his diaper changed every day. Look, you guys agree to change my diaper every day, I'm going to stop using the bathroom, right? Everything was working fine for him. So what this mother did that was so amazing was she made this as motivating and as important to him as it was to her. And ultimately, actually, she was able to take away the stepping stool and have him just go in the toilet. And not just go in the toilet at home, but in other locations like in school and in other areas. That actually points out what is an additional benefit of utilizing this principle that I think is really, really important. This principle is very, very different, but often gets confused with what I'm going to just generically call the reward principle. Reward principle is very, very popular right now in the world of autism treatment. Right? The reward principle says, you do something that I like, or you do something that's important, or you demonstrate this skill, and I give you a reward. I give you a piece of food, or I let you play with a toy that you want to play with, and that's how we do it. And the focus often in those situations is on repetition versus motivation. So the idea is to repetitively teach and focus on this one skill and have the child demonstrate it enough times so you can write it down and prove that they've mastered the skill. Right? Now that it is very popular, and part of the reason why it's popular is because it actually does work. It does work to some degree, but at what cost? That's what I always ask. It does work. What's the cost of it working? And what I hear from parents all the time is, yes, my child does do these 5 things, and I'm glad they do them. Glad they do that. That's great. But my child looks like a robot when they're doing it. They look like they've been pre-programmed. There's no sense of joy and enjoyment. They very rarely generalize it to other areas when they're not getting the same kinds of prompts and rewards. And I'm trying to help my child be more spontaneous and also generalize these skills. And so that's where I struggle with it. That's what I hear from a lot of different parents. So one of the things you're going to see with this is you will never get robotic pre-programmed kinds of behaviors. In fact, robotic behavior is often talked about as a symptom of autism. I'm not at all convinced that it is a symptom of autism. I think it's a symptom of the way that we teach children with autism. And when you teach someone repetitively like that, and there's no context for our children actually understanding why they're learning what they're learning, and why they could even be excited about what they're learning, then that's where robotic behavior starts to come in. So this is all about, and again, this is not about finding what your child is motivated by and then letting them do it after they do the thing you want, right? This mother didn't say, okay, you go pee in the toilet. If you go in the toilet, I will let you play with your stepping stool. Right? It's not about saying, go use the toilet, then I'll let you play with Thomas the Tank Engine because I know you like it. Right? It's actually the reverse. It's about saying, you like Thomas the Tank Engine? Holy cow, so do I. Let's play with Thomas the Tank Engine. Oh, by the way, Thomas the Tank Engine is coming right around the toilet here. right? So it's actually bringing in the educational piece into an activity that is already exciting and motivating for our children. That is the key piece of it. And again, when we do this reward thing too, not only are we not teaching context, nor are we teaching spontaneity, nor are we teaching generalization and interest, but at the same time, we are actually all teaching a way of learning that brands learning as an unpleasant experience. Because what we're basically saying is, do this unfun, unpleasant thing first, and then I'll give you something you like. Because you have to do this lame thing that you don't really want to do. And then you'll do something cool after. Right? It's really interesting. It's the same reason why a lot of typical children and now adults don't like to eat vegetables, but love to eat the desserts and the ice cream. Because we've set it up that way. Eat this gross broccoli, but then you'll get your ice cream for dessert. You don't eat the broccoli, man. You don't get the dessert. I'm just telling you that right now. Right? So we set it up that way. It again promotes the opposite of what we would ideally like. So this is, it's really amazing. I watch my sister Bryn and her husband William, who have kids, and they do things like, hey, if you really sit quietly or do whatever, I'll let you have your bowl of broccoli. And I'm not even joking. And her kids are like sitting like, oh, give us the broccoli, right? So ultimately, this is a key piece to realize. We are actually integrating and marrying these two things, the motivation that your child and the interest that your child already has, and the challenge and the educational piece. And let me just say one more time, this is not about children who are pre-verbal or young. This goes toward children and adults of all ages and all skill levels. Perfect example. We had this, we worked with a family who had this daughter, and her name was Sandra. Sandra rocked, right? Sandra was really cool. Sandra was about 15 and a half. She had Asperger's syndrome, okay? So she was highly verbal. She could talk. She would test really high on IQ scores. But she had no social skills whatsoever, couldn't connect with people or form friendships, actually couldn't even really have a typical conversation. What she would mostly do is fire certain types of questions at you that she would want you to answer in a particular way. And the type of questions that she would fire at you, though, had a particular slant to them. And that goes to her motivation. Now, what was her motivation? Sandra was really into daytime talk shows. Now, can anybody guess what Sandra's absolute favorite daytime talk show was? Yes, I heard it. Jerry Springer. That is right, ma'am. Absolutely. Yes, Jerry Springer, which, of course, her parents were so thrilled about that. And you know, as long as we're on this subject, I just have to say, as a representative of my countrymen, that I think I speak for all Americans when I say that we are all very deeply grateful that somebody took the time and the effort to film and get video footage of American citizens at our most humiliating and then ship that footage all over the world. Very happy about that. Anyway, her parents were not thrilled, to say the least, about this whole focus and excitement about Jerry Springer. And what Sandra would do is Sandra was all about she was the Jerry Springer character. It was like she was the one running the daytime talk show. And everybody else was part of the Jerry Springer panel, right? And she would do all sorts of things. I'm thinking, what can I use as an example? Oh, she would do things like this. She'd either get a spoon or a roll of paper like this, or a stick, something that looked like a microphone, right? And she would walk not just through the house, but down the street, and she'd walk up to people and say, "So Bob, why'd you sleep with your wife's sister's cousin?" And of course, her parents would be like, oh my God, this is so inappropriate, honey. Right? And they were just like, we must break her of Jerry Springer. How do we do this? So they came to the startup program, and they came with this really big agenda of, we got to break her of this Jerry Springer thing, and they had tried lots of different ways, lots of different times to try and stop the Jerry Springer thing. And of course, what happened is Sandra just got more and more into it the more they pushed like that. So they come to the startup program, and they're like, listen, two things. Number one, we really do want to help her move beyond the Jerry Springer thing. Number two is, we'd actually love her to just be able to have a typical conversation with people. Like, you know what? If she could have a typical conversation about, like, what she liked to do on the weekends, what we like to do on the weekends, we would be thrilled. That would be awesome. So we said, okay, let's look at this principle. We need these two things, right? we have the motivation, Jerry Springer. Oh yeah, baby, we got that. And we have the educational goal. The educational goal is have a typical conversation about what we like to do on the weekends. Great, that's all you need. So they get home from the startup on Saturday and they go into Sandra's room and they set up in the middle of her room a real floor mic, like an actual mic, which Sandra's never gotten to have before. And they set up these 4 chairs along the wall with both of her parents, her aunt, and a family friend, and they're like the Jerry Springer panel, right? Sandra comes in, full lips out, because she's so excited. She's got the mic, she's got the panel. And one of the things that was really, I think a lot of you will relate to this who have children and adults with Asperger's syndrome, is Sandra was very monotone and no facial expression, no displays of emotion. So she'd kind of, even when she'd ask the Jerry Springer question, sometimes she'd mimic Jerry Springer, but most of the time she would just talk like this and have this kind of expression and just talk in monotone like that. So the first things they noticed was that Sandra actually appeared genuinely excited about this. She was jumping up and down, she was grabbing the mic, she was really excited, and she goes over and asks them why they slept with their wife's sister's cousins or whatever. And they answer her. They just get really into it and they answer her. And Sandra is excited and she's asking them questions, and it's about 25 minutes in, and Sandra's father throws out a question, which is not allowed, by the way, because it has to go along. Jerry Springer asks the questions, Jerry Springer doesn't answer the questions, right? But this has been going on for a while. He just really gently throws out a question, and Sandra answers it. And they all sort of look at each other for a second. They're like, okay. And then about 5 or 6 minutes later, Sandra's mom asks a question, and Sandra answers it. And so slowly they start to ask more and more questions, and the whole tenor of the conversation starts to change direction. And after about an hour and 40 minutes of this is really starting to flesh itself out, they are actually sitting around in her bedroom, quite literally, having a conversation about what different people on the show like to do with their weekends and like to do on the weekends. And Sandra's talking about what she likes to do, and all the people sitting there talking about what they like to do. The exact kind of typical conversation that they were looking for, they got. But the key is they thought Jerry Springer was in the way of them helping her with this. So they're trying to stamp that out so they could get her to have this conversation. But what they saw was that that Jerry Springer was not in their way. Jerry Springer was a doorway. And so if they used that, they could actually get Sandra to engage in this way. And again, it plays to Sandra's intelligence. Sandra had the capability to have that conversation. Maybe it was a little hard for her. Maybe it wasn't her first choice favorite thing in the whole wide world. But that's why they had to build up lots of motivation on the back end to help push Sandra through that, or help excite Sandra about it, so that Sandra willingly engaged in that way and then started to help to stretch herself with her parents' help to have the kind of conversation that might not immediately come easy to her. So this is a powerful principle. Keep this in mind. You always want to have an educational goal and a motivation that your child is into. I'm going to jump right into the next principle. Okay, it's called teaching socialization through interactive play. Okay, this is really important because, again, the socialization part is key, I tend to see what I sort of think of as an excessive focus and almost an obsession on academic skills as a point of progress for our children. And you know what? Academic skills are important. That's great. If a child's making progress in that area, that's wonderful. But let's really put that in the larger picture of what's most important for our children, what they most need help in, and what's most going to benefit them later on. Right? We could, at the Autism Treatment Center of America and in the Sunrise program, we could spend our focus and get your child to really improve in math and reading, to the point where they're caught up to grade level. And that's great. Then they'll be caught up to grade level. But the problem is they'll be caught up to grade level in math and reading, but they'll still be totally autistic, still have difficulty making friends, not be able to laugh at jokes, not be able to connect with people. Right? We would rather have your child really be able to make friends and have fun in that way and connect with people. And then, if they need help in math and reading, let's help them in math and reading. But we have it's really clearly in that order. And you know what? And I'm sure you can all relate to this, right? When I talk to parents, I don't have parents coming up to me when I ask them like what their dreams are and their hopes are for their children. They don't say, you know, I hope that one day my child could be 2 years ahead in math. Right? Now that would be great, that would be good, but what's really important? What I hear from people is, I hope that one day my child has a bunch of friends, or has a girlfriend or a boyfriend, or has a job that they really like, or complains about their taxes. It's probably an American one. But that they really live all the pieces of their life that we find really satisfying in our life. And then, once they're really seeing success in that area, if they're still behind in math and reading, and by the way, oftentimes they're not, because the main reason they were behind is because they weren't learning from people because they were disconnected from people. So oftentimes by tackling this, you do take care of, by default, these other areas. But if you don't, yes, then we can address those areas. We'll have more of the child's willing engagement then anyway, but they'll already have been successful in the areas that is really most important for them, which is in connecting with other people. And you know what? More and more studies are actually coming out. I just read one a couple days ago. More studies are coming out that are showing that academic success is far less a predictor of being successful in other areas of life than is ability socially, to make friends, to be liked, to connect with other people. That actually has a far greater effect on your trajectory in life anyway. So we stay focused on that area like a laser beam. And we address other areas as they come up, but we stay focused on this area, which is where our children can most use help and where they're going to benefit the most from. And even if we are teaching reading, even if we are, we don't just spend the whole time looking at the book and reading. We might read 2 pages and then act out what just happened on the 2 pages. So everything is interactive. Now there's some just little helping hints that I can throw out that help with implementation of this principle in a practical sense. The first one is we call it the 3 E's: energy, excitement, and enthusiasm. And look, take the example of a circus, right? Circuses are exciting and engage kids across cultures. And that is because circuses are masters of the 3 E's. Circuses know all about it. They know that that's the best way to engage, is if they infuse everything that they're doing with a real sense of color and excitement and enthusiasm and energy. So that actually matters. It might sound simple, but it's actually quite important. If you add the 3 E's to any other learning activity or any activity that you're doing with your child, guaranteed it will increase your child's overall attention span and engagement. It's an easy thing to do, and it adds a lot to whatever you're doing. 3 other pieces to this principle. First one is celebrate. Celebrate is important, right? Now, again, a lot of people say, oh, I already do that, right? And it looks like, oh, nice job, excellent job, sweetie, awesome, you did that, right? That's praise, that's cool, that's good, but we mean really celebrate. We mean actually getting excited. Think of something in your life, right? You all have something in your life that you're passionate about that is really exciting to you, right? That's what we want to do when our children really come through and do something that they've been trying to do and that they get right. Right? We want to really get excited, like, yes, you did it, you just used your words, that is awesome, right? We want to get really excited. Now, listen, you don't have to do it like me, right? That's me, okay? That's the way I do it. You do it in your way. You don't have to try and be me, you don't have to try and be American, you all have your own personalities, but there's a way that however you are when you get really excited and invested in something, the maximum of what you do. And you know what, it doesn't even have to be loud. In fact, if your child has hypersensitive hearing, you don't even want it to be loud, right? But there's lots of ways to do it, right? If I have a child who maybe has sensitive hearing, then no, I'm not going to scream and jump up and down, but I might go, oh, that was great, awesome. Sometimes getting more quiet actually brings more emphasis to what you're doing anyway. So there's lots of different ways to do this, but the key thing to realize is big reaction equals maximum chance of repeat performance. Big reaction, repeat performance. And I'm going to tell you about a situation where that can actually come back and bite you. But in this situation, it absolutely helps you. Whenever your child does anything like that you want them to do, you want to get a maximum celebration going, because that maximizes the chances of repeat performance. Secondly, we want to encourage our children to be good triers. Now, what does that mean? First of all, in complete honesty, most of the children that we work with in the Sunrise program aren't very good triers. They'll try once, and then they're done. They don't get it right, they're moving on. Right? Now, this is one of the many examples where this comes from our own life, right? Most of us, as adults, are petrified of failing, of looking, quote, stupid in front of people, of being judged, of doing something and falling flat on our face, of failing. So we'd much rather either do it and get it right or not have anything to do with it. Right? We don't want to do it and get it wrong, especially repeatedly, especially with people watching. We can't live like that and not have some of it translate down to our children. Now, bottom line, if you want to be, if you're really afraid of failing and you want to not try different things, that is absolutely your prerogative. You have total freedom to do that. But if our children are doing this, it really slows down the learning process and creates a lot of obstacles. Because here's the bottom line. Our children might need to try 8 to 10 times to master certain things. Now, if they are unwilling to try more than once, they will never be able to master the things they need to try 8 or 10 times to master. So it is imperative that we get them to be good triers. And you know what? That entails them getting it wrong. That entails them not doing it in the right way or getting it correct. So that's not a bad thing. When I'm with a child and I say, I try and encourage them to do something or say something and they get it wrong or they don't do it all the way, I don't get disappointed. I get excited because I'm like, great, this is a chance for them to not get it right and for me to help them try multiple times and not get it right. And ultimately get better and better at it, but try and try. We want to build a little bridge from the first try to the second try to the third try to the fourth try, etc. And this is not rocket science, right? It's actually really simple. So I'll give you an example. There might be, let's say, a little boy who points to a glass of water on the shelf in the playroom. So he points to it, and I get an idea of what he's looking at. I go, oh, you want the water? Say water. Use your words. Say water. And let's say this little boy says water, like he totally gets it right. Okay, then I do the first part. Then I celebrate. I'm like, yes, you got it. Here you go. Nice job, right? I'm really excited for him. But let's say it's a different child, and I say water. And this little boy goes, so it says a little piece of it, definitely attempts it, but that's not the whole word, and that's not even most of the word. So it's not correct, but it's an attempt. So in that case, I might go, oh, that was so close. Nice. Let's try again, because that was so close. What? We're going to say what? Right? So now I'm actually building up from the next part. I'm celebrating that they really tried, but I'm not pretending and acting like they got it right. In fact, I'm using it as an excuse for another attempt. And I might actually really sit in and be persistent, and I might work with that little child and really try and have them try 5 or 6 times. First, I really want to have them, it's okay for them to get it wrong and really try, because that's the skill that's going to really serve them long term. To get good at and be comfortable with trying multiple times and not getting it right, and then trying and trying until they eventually do. Really important. Okay, last piece. This is the most important piece of this principle without question. And also, probably for a lot of us, probably the hardest, for a lot of parents and a lot of professionals, prioritize the interaction over the goal. Now, we struggle with this. We struggle with this because we're really into goals. We really want our kids to get these certain things. And you know what? In the Sunrise program, we are very focused on goals. We have lots of goals in the Sunrise program. So this isn't about not having goals or putting your goals aside. It's about making your goals a very important priority, but the number one priority is always going to be interaction. And this is another example of how we actually, in our bigger lives, we actually live in a particular way that then runs counter to this and then bleeds into our programs with our children, right? Think about when this might be a long time ago for some of you, think about when you've fallen in love and gotten involved with someone romantically, right? You first get involved, you're like really excited. You're excited just to spend time with them. You can't wait to get off work so that you can meet up with them again, or you call them on the phone. You're excited and you're like, ooh, it's all romantic, and you really enjoy just talking, or there's a real physical attraction between you, and it's like great. And everything's great. And you know what you love about it? You really start to like this person because you guys have a great interaction, this great connection going on. And then the relationship gets serious. It's serious. It's important. Don't laugh. It's important. Maybe you're not seeing you're seeing each other exclusively, or you get married, or you date. You date over a long period of time, or whatever your definition is of serious, and then it's serious. And then what happens is something happens to this, which is all of a sudden other priorities enter the equation, and all these things that you need from your partner to get them to do the things that you want and to show that they love you in the right way that works for you. So it becomes a situation of like, hey, hello, I've been asking you for 3 days now to take out the garbage. Oh, I'm sure you want me to do it. No, listen, I'll be nice to you. No, I'll be nice to you. When you take out the garbage, then I'll be real nice, okay? But I've asked you a lot, now come on, right? Or, whatever our thing is, right? You said you were gonna be home at 6. It's 7:30. What, I'm just waiting around for you? Oh, this is great, this is really fun. I'm just waiting around for you, right? So all of this stuff is, now we need to get this stuff. We need to get the taking out the garbage. They need to talk to us in a certain way. They need to get home at the right time. They need to make love to us a certain number of times a week, whatever we've decided, right? All these things are important to us, and we really want to get these things. And we're each now grappling for things from our partner. And now all of a sudden, this interaction, which is the whole reason that we got together, has worked its way from priority 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, all the way down. So now it's around priority 47, right? Now this kills relationships. And I don't just work with families who have autism. I do a lot of couples counseling as well. This transition kills relationships. Now, if you want to do it that way, you have every right to do it that way. I'm not telling you how to do it. You do it however you want to do it. But if we do it this way with our children who have autism, then it starts to create lots of obstacles for us. Because the same scenario plays out, right? We have our child, and at first, we're just like thrilled. We have a child, right? We don't care if it's blonde hair, brown hair, light eyes, dark eyes. Who cares? It's our kid. We don't even care if the thing talks. It's so cute. Look at how it cries. It's just our baby. Any interaction we have, we're thrilled. And then we get the diagnosis. And then it gets serious. And now they're missing all this stuff. And they're behind their peers, and they're doing these behaviors that look really strange, and they're not caught up, and they can't make friends, and then there's all this stuff, and then they have digestive problems. Oh my, and we have to fix all these problems. So now, all of a sudden, all this other stuff becomes really important, and the interaction piece works its way down until it's around 47. This, again, when we do this with our children, it becomes a real problem because, remember, the interaction is the thing they most need to learn and get good at. The other stuff is important, but that all comes through interaction. That's the best way to get these other goals, is to get our child reliably interacting with us and to actually want to interact with us and to enjoy it. We had a mother who wanted her son to brush his teeth every night, and he just wouldn't do it. So she figured out a way to solve the problem. And what she would do was, she would chase him around, get him in a headlock, and brush his teeth like this. Now, it worked great. His teeth were clean every night. First of all, though, let's see her try that when he's 15. Not going to be so successful. Right? Secondly, though, and more importantly than any of that, every time she did that, she completely killed the interaction. So yes, she gets clean teeth every night, but the interaction between them is completely destroyed during those times. So ultimately, and here's the thing, you then create more and more difficulty because, okay, today it's brushing teeth, but that's not the only, we have 1,000 other things we're going to want to teach him, right? We're going to want to teach him to increase verbal communication, social skills, even brushing his hair, whatever that is. And now tomorrow, when I go on to those things, that's even harder and harder because he's now seen that these learning new skills is marked by coercion and physical manipulation. So now we've created actually more walls in between future learning. We haven't made anything easier for ourselves. So, what do we do? The key piece, actually, with this little boy, we really wanted to help her, and we wanted to help this mom, and we wanted to help her son. And you know what? We said, listen, if you want him to be good at brushing his teeth, we can help you. We can help you with that. We don't think it's the number one priority for him, but we'll show you this as an example of how you can keep the interaction and promote the goal. One of the key things here is, this is not about giving up goals, it's about working toward a goal, and then as soon as a goal starts to conflict directly with interaction, meaning the only way you can get it is by pushing it really against the child, then we temporarily, very temporarily, put the goal aside and keep the interaction alive and then come back to the goal. Right? So, for instance, we were actually working directly with her son, and ultimately, as 2 examples, we had the first child facilitator went in with these two toothbrushes, right? And went, hey, I got these 2 toothbrushes, we're gonna play with these toothbrushes. And he said, no, 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 no. And every time this boy said, no, 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 our child facilitator put the toothbrushes down, right? Every single time. And literally every 5 minutes, she'd go back and go, wait a minute, I got the toothbrushes, look what we can play. And every time she did that, he would go, no, 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 no. So she would put the toothbrushes back down. Now, ultimately, this happened for about an hour. Every time she picked up the toothbrushes, this little boy would say, no, no, he'd put the toothbrush down. And eventually, he saw that we meant business, that we were gonna walk our talk, that we were really gonna do this. Right? That we were not gonna physically force him, we were gonna do that. And after about an hour, she pulls out the toothbrushes and he's okay with it. She builds up a whole game with him. She gets him to hold the toothbrushes. She gets the toothbrush right here. He has it really close to be put in his mouth. She starts to encourage him. He doesn't really want to, so they stay like this, and then the session ends. And then another child facilitator comes in, and he ends up actually inventing this game with this little boy about tickling your teeth. And now he brushes his teeth every day without even being asked. It's a no-brainer. But the important thing, that's not the point. The point actually is that the original child facilitator, she could have made it all about her ego, and it's really important that she get him to be the one that brushes his teeth, right? But that wasn't what it was about. And yes, maybe she could have just pushed his hand like this, but all that's gonna do is compromise the interaction for the next person and for her, and for this little boy, and that's not what we want. So she didn't push, she went for it as much as she could, and we have a saying in the Sunrise program, no means no. For the next 5 minutes. Then I get to ask again. And then in 5 minutes, I get to ask again. Right? And I'm gonna be relentlessly persistent. I'm gonna ask tomorrow and I'm gonna ask the next day, but I'm also gonna respect all the no's that I get. And that's what worked so beautifully with this little boy, of being really persistent, focusing on the goal, but being willing to temporarily put the goal aside to keep the interaction alive. I cannot possibly overstate the importance of this, because this is what is going to be really responsible for most long-term learning. Because now, again, at first, with the very first goal, it might take a little longer because you're not pushing. But long-term, you're going to save loads of time and increase learning, because now the next thing you try and teach your child, now they're much more engaged. In the learning process, and everything becomes easier versus making everything harder, because everything's used with pushing and force and compromising the interaction the whole time. So you're accelerating long-term learning and you're promoting the interaction that your children most need to learn. This next principle is incredibly important, and it's a principle that tends up. We have a lot of different kinds of classes in the startup program. Like we have some lecture, we have a lot of interactive activities, we have video footage, we have a slideshow which really demystifies a lot of our children's seemingly random behavior, which is excellent. But we also have something called the question and answer session, and that's basically exactly what it sounds like. You guys can ask any questions you want, we'll answer them. And we get all sorts of different kinds of questions. But we tend to get, in a lot of different programs, we get a lot of different questions, and then in many cases it ends up eventually coming down to this kind of a question of, listen, this sounds like a great idea, this sounds like great stuff, but my child does a lot of really challenging behaviors and aggressive behaviors, and what am I supposed to do about that? I mean, I'm just supposed to join with that or something? How do I handle that? And so, we bring you this principle, because we actually don't join in with those behaviors, because they're not isms. Right? So we have we have this principle. And this principle is helping children unlearn challenging behaviors. Key word is unlearn, because it is not genetically programmed into our children to tantrum in a particular way. It's something picked up as a way to get to operate in the world. And it's because of this. We unwittingly teach them what we most want them to change. I know, doesn't that sound crazy? Why would we do that, right? We don't want to do that. The key word is unwittingly. Nobody does. I know none of you are doing that on purpose. You're trying to help your child and help your own life. But ultimately, this is what happens. This is not bad news. This is good news. Because if our children have learned it, they can unlearn it. If we've taught it to them, we can unteach them and help them do it in a different way. Now, what happens in a typical situation, right? Typical situation, our child does some challenging behavior. Let's say you have a little girl and she's ripping the wallpaper, the expensive wallpaper off the wall, right? So what do, right? We come in, whoa, honey, no, don't touch it. Well, I thought you were watching. Honey, no touching the wall. Right? So now, we've made a whole big Hollywood production out of it. Now, I can promise you very few things, but I can promise you this. She gonna do it again. She is going to do it again. And you know why? Because you just made that wallpaper really interesting. Now, this is not about your child trying to drive you crazy and make your life miserable. Really, our children become so good at pushing our buttons, sometimes we can feel that way. Like, why are they trying to do this to me? They're not trying to do anything to you. Basically, remember, let's go back to what our children are experiencing. They have massive unpredictability, so they're trying to establish predictability. And we have the celebration and the 3 E's, remember that? Remember I was telling you it was going to come back to bite us later? The key part is that celebration and the 3 E's, remember, big reaction gets you a repeat performance. Doesn't matter whether the big reaction is a happy reaction or an unhappy reaction. Right? Doesn't matter if you're thrilled or really angry. They're both big reactions. They're both incredibly compelling. And ultimately, number one, when I'm ripping the wallpaper, it's like, wow, look at what mommy and daddy are doing. It's like this whole exciting thing. I want you to think, next time you get really ruffled about something your child does, I want you to think, oh, I just celebrated that. I know I didn't like it very much, but I celebrated it. Right? And that is because we gave it a big reaction. The other thing is we make it more predictable, because now, whenever she rips the wallpaper, it's like, stop it, don't do that, stop. So it's kind of like mommy and daddy are light switches. Like, oh, this is cool. Hold on, angry, sad, angry, happy, angry, happy. Okay, so we do this whole thing, right? We set it up in this way to make it incredibly compelling. You know what else we do? And this is actually amazing to watch. We also do the reverse, which is when our children are doing some more sweet communicative behaviors, they're gently tugging on our sleeve, they're speaking sweetly or verbally, right? Those are what we deem non-urgent events. So what happens is then we're like cooking and we're, honey, I'll be right there. No, I see you pointing to that. I will be right there. Of course, she starts screaming a blue streak. What do? Drop the pan. Honey, honey, honey. What? Right? So we set everything up to actually teach the exact reverse of what we want. So that's not a big deal, because there's a really simple way out. First of all, it does entail a paradigm shift. The paradigm shift is this. This is the new paradigm. When my child is kicking, screaming, yelling, right? When all this is happening, my child's trying to communicate with me. This is great news, right? This is what we want from our children. My child's trying to communicate with me. Yes! Only one problem though. My child is speaking to me in Russian. Now, for those of you who are fluent in Russian, don't pick Russian. Pick Swahili or some other language. I'm picking Russian because I don't know that language. Okay, so but bottom line, when my child's kicking, screaming, pinching, whatever, my child's speaking to me in Russian, right? He can't go down to the corner store and scream and get a pack of gum. Nobody knows what that means, right? So, ultimately, my child is trying to communicate. They're communicating in a foreign language that doesn't work. But, unfortunately, for most of us, we're going, hey, buddy, don't worry about it. I speak Russian. Don't sweat it. Everybody in the house speaks Russian. And, you know, I spent a year living in Sweden, Stockholm, Sweden. I took Swedish classes 5 days a week. Every day, 5 days a week, I took Swedish. You know how much Swedish I learned? Not a whole lot. Because every time I'd go out on the town in Stockholm, everybody would understand me when I spoke in English and speak back to me in English. So I just used that as a crutch. There was no reason for me to really work on it. When I spent some time in Spain, though, I had better darn well learn how to ask for where the toilets were in Spanish, or I'm going in my pants. Because most people just did not understand that. And so I spoke that and learned that much faster. And that is the key to realize, because our children are never going to learn to abandon Russian for English or whatever language you're speaking. They're never going to learn to do that as long as we're like, I understand the Russian. Don't worry about it. So we've got to find a totally different way of doing this. We've got to really turn the tables. And this entails us asking a totally different question. See, the problem is most of us ask a question that I call the slavery question. The slavery question is, how do I stop the tantrum? As soon as you've asked that question, congratulations, you've sold yourself into slavery. Because you are now a slave to this tantrum, which you will do anything to stop, and your child will stop the tantrum when they feel like it, when they've gotten the things that they need. And so ultimately, you've now become a slave to this situation, versus asking this question: how can I help my child to communicate more effectively? Not how can I stop this? How can I help my child to communicate more effectively? Which that might mean your child needs to scream for a while. That's okay. In fact, that might be a really good thing. That might actually help them long term. Now, this is really interesting to see this play out, because a lot of times I can explain this, watch people go home and then not implement it. Right? And the reason for that is because it sounds good what I'm saying, but then you go home and when you're in the throes of it and your child's really yelling and screaming, it's like, oh, I'm like so uncomfortable, I do just want to stop it. And that is why attitude is so important. You cannot implement this principle unless you have the attitudinal backbone of it. And that means, instead of what a lot of us do, which is, this tantrum means something bad about me if I don't stop it, so I have to stop it to show I'm a good mother or a competent teacher. Or we make up other stuff about it, like my child's in deep emotional pain because he's not getting the cookie, and so I have to save my child from this horror, right? And so we do this, and yes, I can totally understand. If you're thinking that, it is really hard to just not do whatever you have to do to stop it. But that's why we have to send ourselves different messages. And we have to send ourselves, okay, my child's trying to communicate. This means nothing about me. The best way I can really love my child, actually, is to help her communicate more effectively so that she can get more of what she wants. This is a good thing. This is not a bad thing. And that leads to, how can I help my child to communicate more effectively? And that's the attitudinal backbone you need to implement this effectively. So it does entail some self-reflection and some soul searching on our parts to really make this happen. Now, what does this mean? This first one, you see how you see a big challenging behavior with a small response? A lot of people confuse this and think what we're saying in the Sunrise program is just completely ignore it and just don't act like it's not happening. Right? And there are other methodologies that say that. That's actually not what we're saying, though. And a lot of people think, they get concerned too, because they think, does that mean just don't react when my child's doing anything? It does mean this. It means when your child is having an aggressive or a tantrumy kind of reaction, you want to have two things in your reaction. Slow, like you literally want to move slow, talk slow, and mellow, low energy. The opposite of the 3 E's, really mellow. Now again, of course, people get concerned about how far to take this. Listen, if you're in the kitchen and your child grabs a really sharp knife out of the drawer, right? Here's my recommendation. Take the knife away, right? You don't want to just sit there and be like, listen, I went to Ron's lecture, so knock yourself out, buddy. You do what you need to do, because I'm not really reacting to this. No, do whatever. If it's a safety issue, you take immediate action. But even if you have to do that, there's a difference between taking immediate action and having a big reaction. That's where the problem comes in, right? What most of us, when our child takes a knife out, right, what do? No! Right? Oh my God, you could have cut yourself. What are you doing, right? This whole thing. So yes, you have to move quickly in that case, right? So, but even then, there's a difference. You could go, you know what, I'm just going to put this away because it's kind of sharp, right? So there's even a difference there. But let's be honest, in most situations, your child's not playing with a meat cleaver. So 9 times out of 10, it's actually not going to be dangerous. They're just screaming and maybe they're pinching a little. Nobody's going to die from that. So ultimately, you can react totally differently. And that means, again, it doesn't mean ignoring. Right? I was working with a little girl and she was screaming once and she was doing something like this. I just pointing this thing, she's yelling, right? So I go, sweetie, I know you want something. You know what? I don't understand when you're yelling. If you used your words, I'd understand. Yelling, though. Now, yes, she wasn't totally verbal. I'm not saying she understands every word I'm saying, but you'd be surprised. Your kids are going to get the gist of it. Because then you follow it up, and I go, Okay, no, let me look. Just, see, I know you want something. I'm not sure. So I can't understand the yelling. If you used your words, though. Just look at that. Is it this? No! Okay, so it's clearly not this. Okay, let me just look. See, I can't understand, but I'm going to try and help you. Is it this? Right. So I'm still trying to be user friendly. I'm trying to help her, but I'm kind of dumb. See, most of your problems is you're way too smart for your own good. Like a lot of you can tell the pitch of your child's scream by what they want. You've got to stop that. We've got to all get collectively dumber. This is actually going to help our kids. So I'm just really dumb. I'm just not sure what she's pointing to. And eventually, I might even stumble on it and get it to her. But it's going to take a while because I can't understand her. Now, the key piece, and this is, if you just do this, if you just do that part, what you're going to do is show your child it's difficult to communicate. And you do not want to be sending that message. So you've got to do that side, and you've got to couple it with this side. This is very, very important. So in the same way, now when your child does try to verbally communicate or connect with you in that way, or does something sweetly or communicatively, you've got to react the way you used to react to the tantrums, right? So if that same girl had been going, and let's say, I don't even know exactly what she's saying, but she's trying to talk, right? So then I might say, oh, that was a word. What did you want? What did you want? What's so awesome? Is it this? No? Okay. Wait. Love it. That was great. Here, right? So now I'm running around. Now I'm running around going, what do you want? I'm going to move heaven and earth to get it to you. Right? That's the key piece. You've got to do both of those together. And then what starts happening is this plays to your child's intelligence, just like the other principles, plays to your child's intelligence. So ultimately, I have to tell you, I've seen this with lots of children. It's one of the fastest tantrum reduction and elimination techniques I've ever seen. Now, will it immediately eliminate all tantrums? Will your child never scream or tantrum again? No, they probably will. But you know what? They will not use it as a regular form of communication because they will not use a method of communication that never ever works. They're going to start to look for another way to communicate to get more of what they want faster, and you're going to be there to show it to them. You're going to show them what that is. Right? And that is the key. So your children will capitalize on this, and this will really help them. And you know, there was a mom in a particular startup program that was like, it's a good idea, I used it, but it doesn't work with my son. It doesn't work with him. And I said, wow, that's amazing. Wow, so what do you do then? I mean, you do it and it doesn't work? She's like, yeah. I'm like, well, explain to us what happens. She's like, oh, well, he wants a cookie all the time, especially before bed, and I don't want to give him a cookie before bed because he'll be up all night and bouncing off the wall, so I don't give it to him. I say, that sounds great to me. I totally agree with that. So what happens? You just don't give him the cookie? She's like, yeah, and I say, sorry, it's bedtime, you can't have the cookie. Okay, and then what does your son do? Oh, well, this is what I'm telling you. He tantrums and kids, and I want the cookie. And he starts flopping around on the floor and this whole thing. I say, oh, okay, so then what do you do? And she's like, I just told you, I do this principle. I say, you can scream all you want, you're not getting the cookie, sorry. I go, okay. So then basically you just don't give him the cookie. He screams all night, you just say, no, I'm not giving you the cookie, right? She's like, yeah, exactly. I mean, sometimes there's situations where he's had a tough day and you know, he can scream like that for 2 hours. So obviously when it goes on like that kind of situation, sometimes I have to give him the cookie. So here's the thing. If you're gonna buckle, don't wait 2 hours to buckle. Buckle now. Save yourself some time, and at least don't teach your child they gotta scream for 2 hours to get it. But ultimately, hopefully you won't buckle at all, because you're gonna have a different attitudinal point of view on this. You're gonna really see this as helping your child to communicate. You're gonna stick to your guns, and in the early days, that might mean they scream a little bit. And you know what? They might even escalate when you first try it. They might scream louder or tantrum a little longer, and you know what you wanna be saying? Oh, my daughter or my son is just speaking Russian louder. Doesn't matter how loud it is, doesn't change the language, still Russian, Right? It's so funny. I love watching Americans in foreign countries like in Europe, like go up to some French guy in Paris and be like, "Can you tell me where the toilet is?" I'm like, he's not deaf, he's French. There's a difference. Okay, so loud doesn't mean I understand you. Loud is just speaking a foreign language louder. That's all. I still only respond to English. That's all I know. Right? So that's the key piece. And you know what? I rarely get a person who's sort of like, "I promise you I never give him the cookie. I swear to God I never give him the cookie," and he screams anyway. And you know what I say to that? I say, "Okay, I believe you. But you know what? Somebody's giving him the cookie." Right? Your son's not crazy. Right? Somebody in your house or somewhere else is responding in this way. So you've got to get a lot of consistency here. This, I'm actually just going to touch on this principle extremely briefly, and I'll tell you why. One, because I could spend a lot of time on it and actually go into a lot of detail with you, and I'd rather not take the time to do that right now. Number two is right now the most important thing for all of you anyway is just to get started on some first steps on this principle. In the startup program, we go into a lot of detail on how to set up your child's bedroom or whatever to be this special work playroom to really optimize learning and interaction. Totally, we focus a lot on that. We can help you with that. But now I just want to give you an initial idea of what to think about. Okay, first of all, we have this special playroom that I was talking to you. That was a picture of it. There's some different attributes that mark the playroom. Again, rather than talking about all of them, I'm actually just going to talk about the first one and the last one, because they're the most important ones to keep in mind right now. The first one is it's free from distraction. Okay, that means it doesn't have a lot of sights and sounds. Most of our children are highly overstimulated for reasons that we've discussed already. But the thing is, in our head, a lot of us think, well, I want to take my child to the amusement park or to the playground with the other kids because I don't want to deprive them of a typical situation. So I want to put them in I want to put them in a mainstream school and everything like that. And that's an admirable thought. The idea is good, to try and help your child to have these typical experiences makes total sense. The thing is when you take your child, in most cases, 99% of the cases, when you take your child to those situations, they're not having a typical experience because they're not able to digest it like a typical child is. So even though they're in a typical environment, look, if that really made a child not autistic, nobody'd be here. We'd just put all our kids in with typical kids and a few years the autism would be gone. But that's not the way it works. Right? Our children have sensory processing difficulties, and that means most of them are very overstimulated. So rather than thinking, can I get them into a typical environment as soon as possible? We do want that, by the way. The idea is to get your child into a typical environment eventually. But the idea is first, get them so that they can actually digest that, so that they can go back into the playground and be successful there and actually have a digestible experience there. And that means starting off in a very focused playroom that doesn't have pictures on the wall, that doesn't have a lot of sounds, and is very secluded in the sense that it's a very insular room. To a typical child, it might be considered quite boring, but to our children, it's going to be their haven. It's going to be the place that's going to help them. And you may think, well, God, that sounds a little extreme, like just putting a child in there, and especially if they're doing the program full time, doing that all day. You know what? It is extreme. It is extreme. It is a temporary, extreme environment designed to get permanent, extreme results. The idea is not to keep your child in there for the next 15 years. The idea is a short amount of time, a couple of years, 3 years, whatever, of focusing on this so that eventually we can help build your child up to a point where they don't need the playroom anymore and where they can operate successfully in typical environments. That's the whole idea of it. The last piece, to jump all the way down to here, no control battles. Another benefit of this is that every time you have to say, no, don't touch that, don't do that, you can't do that, you're compromising the interaction. People get concerned about spoiling their children. This is not a matter of spoiling your children. Yes, when your children are farther along, we can worry about setting boundaries, and we can help you with that, actually. We do that. But in these days, when you're really trying to first build up that level of interaction, you want to have a yes room, where you don't have to say no to anything. And this playroom, it's a very safe place. It's designed to be a place where you can just building and challenging your child and also building more of a deeper relationship with them, etc. And so it's designed to have no control battles. We also have a big focus on internal environments, where we've just noticed it's incredibly important. You know, autism is a neurological disorder, but it has a lot of relations to immunological, gastrointestinal, and biophysiological issues that our children have as well. So it's really important to take this into consideration. I still hear, I wish I didn't, I still hear a lot of pediatricians and things telling people, listen, your child has a neurological disorder, it's autism, nothing they eat is going to make any difference. That is just simply false. I mean, I can't say that in a nice way, it's just not true. Actually, if you go to autism conferences and you talk to any of the scientists who are at the leading edge of autism treatment, they have concrete evidence showing exactly why and how what your child eats absolutely affects their neurological development and absolutely should be paid attention to. Who here has heard of a gluten and casein-free diet? Oh, good, most of you, excellent. There's lots of foods your child may be sensitive to. These are the first 4 groups to consider. Gluten, a complex protein in wheat and other foods. Casein, a complex protein in dairy, and milk products in particular. A lot of those are large proteins. They go in, they don't get properly digested by your child, who in some cases, not all, has a leaky gut, which basically means there's like little miniature holes in your child's small intestine. So the protein goes into your child's bloodstream, crosses the blood-brain barrier, and actually binds to the same receptors in your child's brain that heroin and morphine bind to. So some of your children are quite literally on drugs from these foods. And if your child is a child that's really just likes grilled cheese and milk, then instead of thinking, well, that's all my child eats, what you want to be thinking is, that is a sign of addiction when a child eats like that. So that probably means they are having a problem with gluten and casein. And to address it, you can't just cut down on gluten and casein. You actually have to get it to 0. So there's different ways. We can help you with that too. We focus a lot on that. Also, caffeine and sugar. Caffeine's a nerve stimulant. You don't really want to be giving your kids that. Sugar is, many of our children have hyperinsulinism, oversecretion of insulin in relation to sugary foods, or they have candida yeast infections, which is a candida yeast overgrowth in their intestines, both of which inhibit brain function when they eat simple carbohydrates and sugars. So those are some basic foods to start to look into right now. A note on some overarching concepts that I think you're going to want to know in order to make these principles stick. Just 2 of them actually. One is a lot of you raised your hands to say that you're professionals. You know, I'm a professional too in the same field, so I really feel a sense of camaraderie with you, that you've devoted your life to the same thing that I've devoted my life to, and we've had the chance at the Autism Treatment Center of America to work with so many of the most dedicated and helpful and incredible professionals. At the same time, we have actually seen nothing. I mean, we have seen nothing that can equal the power of the parent as a force for change in their child's life. We just haven't seen anything to match it, because nobody loves your child the way you love them and has the kind of dedication that you have. Nobody can match that, and nobody has the long haul commitment that you have, because you're in it for life. And you know what? To be totally honest, no 4-hour evaluation can match the day in, day out experience that you have as parents with your own children. So a lot of parents feel really pushed aside in this whole process. We actually try and have the opposite focus, which is not only do we not push parents aside, we really try and focus on parents as the #1 resource for their children, and we give them a central role in their child's Sunrise program and spend a lot of time training parents, because you are the ones who can most affect change in your child's life. Now, I bring this up because sometimes I know it feels really hard, like you feel like you're pushed in a lot of different directions and you're given conflicting information, and you're told you're too emotional and you don't know what you're talking about, and I know that can feel tough, and I guess that I would say, ultimately, you are the parents and you get to decide, and if somebody tells you to do something and it doesn't feel comfortable, it doesn't feel right to you, you do not have to do it with your child. And if you are doing something, like let's say you're joining your child, somebody comes up to you and says, you know what, there's no research for that, that's just going to reinforce the behavior, but you've been joining and you've seen it work with your child, then you're allowed to keep doing what you see works. We have survived for 1 million years on following our direct observations of what works and what doesn't. Human race did quite well on that for a while. Then about 30, 40 years ago, we've decided that's not important anymore. All that matters is institutional published research. Now, I'm not against research. Right? I majored in biomedical ethics. How could I possibly be against research? In fact, research has given us penicillin and lots of life-saving things. So talk to doctors, go on the internet, find all this stuff out, but don't let the research decide the future for your child. It doesn't get to decide that. Only you get to decide that. So that's a key piece that we really try. You know, one of the biggest changes I do see in parents in the period of the 1 week that they're at the startup, before they've even gotten a chance to implement all this with their children, is that they really come into their own and really see themselves as a much more powerful advocate for their own children. And it's so cool to see it, to watch it happen. Whenever I bring up attitude, I often have this experience of people saying, you know what, don't talk to me about attitude, just show me what to do. Just show me what to do, I'll do it. But the thing to realize is the attitude is not apart from the techniques. It is a part of the techniques. And it is quite specific and very concrete in the benefits that it brings. It's so important to look at this. And yet at the same time, we're given all these messages that are counterproductive for us. So the thing that we found most important is focusing on not judging our children's behaviors today, really not judging where they are, while at the same time really believing they can go anywhere tomorrow. Now again, the thing about this is that we are constantly fed these messages about that our children are tragedies, that it's really sad that you have the children that you have, or other people even saying, oh, I'm so glad I don't have a child like that. Now, here's the thing. You know, my father, when he wrote on the second page of the book, Sunrise, the Miracle Continues, this quote that I love. For us, there was the question, could we kiss the ground that the others had cursed? And you know what? I love that quote. I love it. Because, you know, that's what I'm asking you to do. I'm asking you to kiss the ground that maybe for right now the rest of the world curses. Do I wish that on you? Would I want the world to talk about or think about your children that way? Absolutely not. But now, that's the world we live in. That's the way things are. The world is going to call your child a tragedy. You can call your child a blessing. The world might call your child ugly. You can see your child as beautiful. And when you see your child as beautiful, they become beautiful. That is the key piece here. And this absolutely will change your whole experience of this. Now I know you might be thinking, well, it's easy for me to stand up here and say, have a different attitude. Right? You're the ones who are on the front lines every day experiencing all of these things happening with your child and with other people not being supportive and trying to make this work. So I would never want to belittle that. In fact, that's the reason why you're the most important group of people to utilize this piece. This is so important. And it's not just about saying, I'm going to change my attitude, I'm going to feel better about this. We all know that doesn't work for most of us. It's about changing the messages that we send ourselves, the messages we tell ourselves. Because when you're stressed out about your child, it's because you're telling yourself things like, my child's going to be in real trouble in 40 years when I die, it's going to be terrible, or there's nothing I can do that's effective right now, or maybe this is my fault. We feed ourselves these things, and then of course we're stressed out, of course we're unhappy. That makes total sense. So the idea is the starting point for this, and we can help you with this in a lot of different ways. Spend a lot of time in the startup on this. But the starting place is, look at the messages you're sending yourself. So if you start to realize, like, oh, I'm just telling myself that this is horrible, or I'm telling myself that my child will never change, or that this is my fault. Start to look at, okay, you know what? My child is where he is right now. Where my child is today tells me nothing about where my child's going to be tomorrow. Nothing at all. Or that's what these people think, but these people aren't the parents of my child. I can decide something new now. Or thinking about where my child's going to be in 40 years isn't going to actually help my child today. The best way to help my child today is to focus on helping them right now and really loving them where they are and looking at ways to try and help build a connection with them. So when we start to change the messages, we have a completely different emotional response and a completely different experience. Now this is not just about so that you guys can feel better, although I certainly would want that for you. The key piece for this is that, bottom line, we focus on attitude because it is the best way to get your children to interact and progress. That's the bottom line of it. And we see this over and over again. When children on the autism spectrum are facilitated with people who are uncomfortable for whatever reason, even if it's just because they had a hard day at work, but they're uncomfortable, they're judgmental. Our children retreat deeper into their autistic world. And when they are facilitated and worked with by someone who is really comfortable with them and with what's going on, they start to come out of their box and connect more. So having this attitude actually turns you into an interaction magnet, which is the very thing that is most important for your children to have. Now, I have had some people ask me questions of, okay, so that's the Autism Treatment Center of America. I know you have a center in the US. What do you actually do? How do you actually help people? So let me just take a few minutes to give you an overview of that. Probably what is most relevant to most of you who are sitting here is something called the Sunrise Program Startup. The Sunrise Program Startup is a week-long training program that's really designed to give you everything that you need to start up and begin this program. All the different skills, all the different focus points, different pieces of information that you might need. We focus on a number of different areas, actually. We address things like facilitating interaction with your child, jump-starting speech and language development, how to deal effectively both with stimming kinds of behaviors as well as with more aggressive and challenging tantruming kinds of behaviors. We help you recruit and train a team of volunteers so that you're not doing all of it yourself and that your child also has a variety of people to interact with. We help you talk about designing and creating this optimized learning environment, this work playroom. We focus on implementing this stuff in the real world that you guys are living in, the sort of hectic day-to-day environment, but how to implement this stuff in that and how to really make a difference in your child's development and your child's trajectory based on real-world application of this stuff rather than sort of pie-in-the-sky theories. Lastly, we do try and focus a lot on creating and sustaining an attitude of hope and optimism for your child. So we spend probably half of the startup program doing a lot of attitudinal training with you to help address the things that a lot of you might be struggling with, whether it's being afraid for your child's future or getting frustrated with what your child's doing or not doing. We do also have more advanced programs. We have, for instance, a program called Maximum Impact and a program called New Frontiers, which are more advanced programs once you've set up your program to take it to the next level. We have a program called the Intensive Program, which is a more individualized program for you and your child. Again, that once you have your program set up and it's up and running. We also have other services like outreaches where we can sometimes send someone into your home to help you really hone your program. We have video feedback where you can take video footage of you or other facilitators in with your child and then send us the video footage, and then we call you and give you feedback on the footage so that you can get even better and more adept at helping your child learn. We also have just typical phone consultations where you can call and get your questions and concerns answered as well. The thing that I would want to really highlight, though, for all of you is we do have a 25-minute initial consultation call, which is we don't charge for. It's actually a chance for you to just ask all your questions, see if how the Sunrise program would apply to your child, and really get all your questions answered. We also have kind of a mini university where we do training and certification programs, either to be certified in child facilitation, working directly with children, or to be certified as a teacher to train and work with other parents and professionals as well. And that's the kind of thing that they're ongoing, really very in-depth training programs. Not everyone gets certified who enters in, and we have a selection process as well. If this is something that you are looking for in terms of a career, we can call you or send you more information about that as well. Now, I get a lot of questions about this. I get this from reporters a lot. You can't guarantee that all children are going to turn out like you, right? And I say, absolutely, of course we can't. Every child's different. They're going to turn out differently. And they say, right, so aren't you promoting false hope in these parents whose children may not turn out like yours, who may not recover fully? And I've gotten to the point where I love getting this question because I think it talks to a really important societal belief that we have, which is this idea that there are times when hope can be bad or wrong or inappropriate. And I don't know how we got here. I don't know how we got to this point where you're supposed to apologize for believing in and hoping for your children. I don't know when we decided that a life sentence was better than an open door and an outstretched hand. But I have to tell you, we work with parents every day. Bottom line, hope leads to action. Without action, we're not helping any of our children. So you should never have to apologize for hoping for your children or for believing in your children. That's what makes all this possible. And you know what? Hope is not a promise. Hope is not saying, I guarantee you in 5 years your child will look like this. And you know what? All children that do the Sunrise program do not fully recover. We have a bunch of children who have fully recovered like me, who are younger than me, but who don't have any trace. And we have a lot of other children who still have lots of challenges. Now they've progressed to the point that far outstrips their original prognosis, but a lot of them still have different challenges and are still working with that. And it's not about making everyone into a cookie cutter image of me. Every child is different. And yes, we can't predict what your children will do tomorrow, but let's not try and predict what our children are not going to be able to do tomorrow. You know, I never get asked about false pessimism. I get asked about false hope. I don't get asked about false pessimism, about us deciding in advance what a 3-year-old or a 7-year-old or a 12-year-old is never going to be able to do for the next 40 years. How on earth can we know that? Why on earth would we want to decide that in advance? Let's just not decide that and give our children every possible opportunity that we can possibly give them. And that's all we can do. And then ultimately the last piece is going to be up to them anyway. It's not going to be up to us. It's going to be in their hands or God's hands or the universe's hands. The best we can do is give them every opportunity. And I love this thing that my father wrote. It's a quote. It's a dedication in the original Sunrise book. And he wrote, "To every child everywhere who wants a chance." And that's what you're all doing just by being here. You're giving your children a chance, and I really, really appreciate you giving your children a chance. So thank you very much.